𝐼𝐴 has entered the worlds of life. And in this canto, in the first section, we saw that 𝐼𝐴 experienced a subtle symbolic expression of life as we know it, full of contradictions and doubts and ups and downs, and even there's an enjoyment in extremes and passing from one thing to another. And at the end of the section, he told us, this is not the true face of life. Life is a divine power, and beautiful lines. I should be able to remember them.
I have a question. Is not true in the subtle physical?
What?
What you said?
The thing about the subtle physical, he explained to us, is that it's all a matter of form, just like our world, and surfaces and appearances.
It was out this morning I read in Savitri talk with Purani, showing yourself the subtle physical not accept the truth.
It doesn't accept.
I am very
yes, right.
I understand. It was that.
And he even says, it gives beautiful forms to dangerous powers.
Yeah. Okay.
And there, life is lazy. She's just enjoying this perfection of appearance.
Yeah.
But 𝐼𝐴 can't be satisfied by that. No, he's left this world of forms, and that world of forms also, it may be very charming and delightful and appealing to the eyes and the senses, but his great spirit, he is looking for something much, much more. So now he's moved on to the worlds of life. And as I said, the first experience when he enters into this life realm, it's an expression of life as we know it, full of doubt and contradiction. But he says, life's moods are faces of the infinite. Beauty and happiness are her native right, and endless bliss is her eternal home. That is where life has come from. And in the next section, he tells us this now revealed its antique face of joy. 𝐼𝐴 is able to see those worlds of griefless life, and we are a bit in the middle of that, of the description of this, of these worlds. So I'm going to read on from line 292 on page 124. The Spirit's luminousness was bodied there. Life's contraries were lovers or natural friends, and her extremes keen edges of harmony. Indulgence with a tender purity came and nursed the God on her maternal breast. There none was weak, so falsehood could not live. Ignorance was a thin shade protecting light. Imagination, the free will of truth. Pleasure, a candidate for heaven's fire. The intellect was beauty's worshipper. Strength was the slave of calm spiritual law. Power laid its head upon the breasts of bliss. There were summit glories inconceivable, autonomies of wisdom's still self-rule, and high dependencies of her virgin Son. Illumined theocracies of the seeing soul, throned in the power of the transcendence ray. A vision of grandeurs, a dream of magnitudes, in sun-bright kingdoms moved with regal gait. Assemblies, crowded senates of the gods, life's puissances reigned on seats of marble will. High dominations and autocracies and laureled strengths and armed imperative mights. All objects there were great and beautiful. All beings wore a royal stamp of power. There sat the oligarchies of natural law, proud, violent heads served one calm monarch brow. All the soul's postures donned divinity. There met the ardent mutual intimacies of mastery's joy and the joy of servitude imposed by love on love's heart that obeys and love's body held beneath a rapturous yoke. All was a game of meeting kinglinesses. For worship lifts the worshipper's bowed strength, close to the God's pride and bliss his soul adores. The ruler there is one with all he rules. To him who serves with a free, equal heart, obedience is his princely training school, his nobility's coronet and privilege. His faith is a high nature's idiom, his service a spiritual sovereignty. Sri Aurobindo is describing to us some of these griefless worlds, not the very highest ones and not the lower ones, worlds lifted halfway to heaven, he says at the top of page 123. So Here he's describing one where joy was king, with love for minister. You'll read, Suresh?
The spirit's luminousness was bodied there. Life's conveys the lovers of natural friends, and her extremes keen edges of harmony. Indulgence with the tender beauty came, and nursed the God of her maternal breast.
Let's pause there. So, all the wonderful lights of the Spirit take bodies there. We see forms, beings with forms, no? And one characteristic of those worlds is that all those opposites, those contraries and contradictions that life enjoys so much, here they are not quarreling. Instead, they are lovers or natural friends. And her extremes, her extreme oppositions, her heights and her depths, they are not in opposition to each other. Instead, they are just giving like a keen edge, a well-sharpened knife to harmony. Sometimes we hear this in music, that there are notes which might seem to be discords, but if the composer knows really how to use them, those contrasting, almost discords, they make the harmony more intense, more keen, like a sharp knife. Can be very astonishing to listen to hear these keen edges of harmony. Then there's indulgence. In our ordinary world, indulgence is something we think we have to avoid. And we think of mothers who are too indulgent to their children. And we say, oh, they're spoiling their children. But here, this indulgence comes with a tender purity. And what she's nursing is the God, the inner divinity. Very gently and tenderly, she's nursing him. Is that where we stopped?
Yeah.
So next lines are very interesting, Alice.
There none was weak, no falsehood.
So false.
So falsehood did not live. Ignorance was a thin shade protected in light. Imagination, the free will of truth. Pleasure, a candidate for heaven's fire. The intellect was beauty's worshipper. Strength was the slave of calm spiritual law. Power laid its head upon the breasts of bliss.
So perhaps these are some of the oppositions of life, no? But the important thing is that in those worlds of griefless life, nobody was weak. So, he says, falsehood could not live. It's very interesting to think that falsehood and crookedness comes because of weakness and fear. Even in those worlds that are lifted only halfway to heaven, there is ignorance, but it's just such a thin shade, like a very fine cloth that we might put over a lamp, no? And it's protecting the light. Imagination. Imagination is a very important quality which Sri Aurobindo mentions several times in the poem. What is the importance of imagination? Here in this world, imagination was the free will of truth. Truth can think and make formations, creative formations, freely. There's no restriction. And pleasure like indulgence. In our world, we think that in order to be spiritual, we have to be careful about pleasure. But in that world, pleasure was a candidate for heaven's fire, for that intense purity of heaven. The intellect. Sometimes in our world we feel that too much intellect blinds us to beauty. But there, these opposites come together. The intellect, the reason, orderly reason, was beauty's worshipper. There is strength there. In our world, strength often muscles its way through, pushes its way around, no? But there it is not like that. Strength was a slave, completely submitted to calm spiritual law. And power doesn't assert itself. Very gently it lays its head upon the breasts of bliss, of Ananda, because that's a world of delight. Sebastian?
There were solid glories, inconceivable, autonomies of wisdom's still self-rule, and high dependencies for virgin sun, illumined theocracies of the seeing soul, throned in the power of the transcendence ray.
Yes. So we were reading about these worlds lifted halfway to heaven. Now Asvapati seems to be seeing even higher realms, summit glories, high peaks, inconceivable. We can't imagine them. Those worlds are autonomies of wisdom's still self-rule. They don't need any other ruler. They are self-ruled by wisdom alone, so quietly. And there are not only those autonomies where wisdom rules herself, there are also other realms which are dependencies. They are also ruled by wisdom, high dependencies of her virgin sun, that wonderful, pure sunlight of wisdom. There are also the autonomies and dependencies. These are kind of contrasting kinds of political organizations. Another kind of political organization, another kind of government is theocracy, where everything is, in principle, ruled by the divine, by God, a theocracy. So he sees illumined theocracies of the seeing soul. And there the beings seem to be throned in the power of the transcendence ray, the direct light of the eternal and infinite. Will you read, please?
A vision of grandeurs, a dream of magnitudes, in sun-bright kingdoms, moved with regal gait. Assemblies, crowded senates of the gods, life's puissances reigned on seats of marble will. High dominations and autocracies, and laureled strengths and armed imperative mights.
I think you can read the next 2 lines.
All objects there were great and beautiful. All beings wore a royal stamp of power.
Yes. So that's apart from these theocracies, there are also these very majestic beings. He sees them, a vision of grandeurs, such noble beings, a dream of magnitudes, of greatnesses. And they are moving about like royal beings, moving in these sun-bright kingdoms, moved with regal gait. That's the way that a king moves. Regal, it's royal.
Gait means? Gait.
Gait. The gait is the way that you walk. So if you're a very noble and powerful royal person, you have a special dignified way of walking. Your gait, the way that you walk. So Asvapati sees these noble beings gathered together in assemblies. They come together, meetings, crowded senates of the gods. The senate, that was where all the Roman powerful people gathered. These are senates of the gods. In those crowded senates, the powers of life, life's puissances, reigned. They are governing those worlds, and they govern them. They are seated in ranks, hierarchical ranks, on these marble seats, seats of marble will. It means they have wills that are powerful and pure, like marble. High dominations. These are where there are masters, rulers. And then there are autocracies, where people rule themselves. There are laureled strengths. Again, it makes us think about those Roman senates, where the senators, the powerful people, they wore wreaths made of laurel leaves. The right to wear that laurel leaf was given to people who had served the state in some special leading role. And then the warriors, the armed, imperative mights, they are so powerful, nobody can disagree with them or oppose them. So that is a certain kind of life world, a world of power and grandeur. So in that world, all objects were great and beautiful, and all the beings wore a royal stamp of power. It's not that some of the beings were powerful and others weren't. All of them had their own kind of dignity and power.
And then what is the difference between autonomies and
Autocracies.
Autonomy is self-power.
I don't know what I would find if I looked in the dictionary, but autonomy suggests one entity or person who's autonomous, who is it can be that there are, I think in China they have autonomous regions. They're supposedly free to rule themselves. They're not ruled by the central government. In fact, it's not like that in China, but anyway, that's how the word is used.
Here in Tamil Nadu, we have autonomous universities.
Yes, so they're allowed to administer themselves. They don't have to be ruled by the state or by the center. Yeah? But autocracy is more the idea of self-rule, of somebody ruling themselves. Yeah? They're very close in meaning. And then we find another political term. Amrita, would you read?
They said the oligarchies of natural Rome, proud, violent as so one monarch grown. All the souls lustrous don't divinity.
Yes, oligarchies. It means rule by the few. There are a few aristocrats, no? The oligarchies of natural law. And sometimes an oligarchy, out of the few, they will choose one to be their king. No? So these proud, violent heads of the oligarchs served one calm monarch brow, but probably they've chosen that one themselves. So in those worlds, all the soul's postures donned divinity. They're wearing divinity. That is their robe. And then there's another very, very interesting passage. Do you like to read? You like to read? Yeah.
They are meant that we are the mutual intimacy, open masteries, joy, and the joy of servitude, imposed by love on love's heart that obeys, and love's body held in our natural yoke.
Yes, this is a theme which Sri Aurobindo explores, and not only in Savitri, but some of his other poems also. This joy of lovers, the ardent, the burning mutual intimacies of one who is a master and those or the one who serves. They have a different kind of joy, and yet it is a mutual joy, of mastery's joy and the joy of servitude. The master and the servant love each other, and that relationship between them is imposed by love, on love's heart that obeys, and it may be even on love's body, which is held on by a rapturous yoke. It seems like a bondage, but in fact it is this ardent mutual intimacy. Who's sitting behind Praveen, hiding there? Slava. Would you read, please? Yeah.
All was created for innocence, for perfectly that worshippers bow to the God's pride and belief his toes adores. There is one with all his rows. To him who serves as a free, equal heart, obedience is his rightly reads school, his nobilities, commit, and privilege, his fight is a high nature's ideal, his every spiritual story.
Thank you. So this is some deep truth underlying the whole idea of aristocracy, of noble beings. No? It says it all was a game of meeting kinglinesses. They are all noble beings, and their interchange is like a game, a play. And the secret, the key to it, is that if we worship someone, if we look up to someone very much, even though we may bow our head and feel inferior, the fact that we worship his nobility lifts us up, lifts up the worshipper's bowed strength, and brings it very close to the pride and the bliss that his soul is worshipping and adoring. In that world, the ruler is one with all he rules. So there's no real question of superior and inferior. There is this oneness, but still they may have to play different roles in this game of meeting kinglinesses. But to him who serves, if your role is to serve in this game, if you do your service with a free, equal heart, not resenting your position, happily serving because you know that you are free. To him who serves with a free, equal heart, this obedience, obeying, doing what you are told, is in fact a wonderful training school. And the princes, the young nobles, they are supposed to pass through that school of practicing obedience in order to learn how to rule. That obedience is even the mark and sign of his nobility. It's like a coronet. A coronet is not a crown. It's a prince will wear it. And it's his privilege, a sign of his nobility. His faith. Here I think his faith, it means like his loyalty. He is faithful. His faithfulness. It's like the idiom, like the language of a noble nature. And his service may seem to be working as a servant, but in fact it's a kind of spiritual sovereignty. He's a ruler over himself, and he's got that noble position. And then after this realm of grandeurs and magnitudes, there are other realms. Praveen.
There were realms where knowledge joined created power in her high home and made her all his own. The grand illuminate seized her gleaming limbs and filled them with the passion of his flame, till all her body was its transparent house, and all her soul, the counterpart of his soul.
So this is like a marriage between knowledge and power. No? It's even like an allusion to these marriages of heroes with queens. In the ancient literature we have the story of Arjuna and Chitrangada. No? There are stories like that. So knowledge, the power of knowledge, joins the creative power, the conscious force. She's a queen, she's a ruler, an empress in her high home, but that power of knowledge, like a king, he embraces her and makes her all his own. The power of knowledge is a power of light, the grand illuminate. So he seizes the gleaming limbs of that power and filled them with the passion of his ray, his light, till all her body was its transparent house, and all her soul a counterpart of his soul. They become one in this way.
So your knowledge is he
or she. It's like that always. No? Yeah. Joel.
Apotheosized, transfigured by wisdom's touch, our days became a luminous sacrifice, an immortal moth in happy and endless fire. She burned in this sweet, intolerable blaze. Her captive life wedded her conqueror.
It's a continuation of the same picture. Apotheosized, divinized, transfigured by the touch of wisdom. Her days, the days of this life power, became a luminous sacrifice, full of light. And Sri Aurobindo says it's like an immortal moth in happy and endless fire. It's the image of the moth who falls in love with the candle flame, you know, and it gets, of course, burned. But in this case, there's no destruction. There's no dying. It's an immortal moth, and she's delighted to be in that happy and endless fire, that intense feeling. She's burning in that sweet, intolerable blaze of the grand illuminate. So in a situation like this, it's as if the life power has become captive, she's been conquered, but she's happily marrying her conqueror. And what is the result of this marriage? That's what comes next, Ganga-Lakshmi.
In his white sky she built the world anew. She gave to mind's calm pace the motor's speed, to thinking a need to live what the soul saw, to living an impetuous to know and see.
So it's a kind of mutual interchange, no? In the wide sky of knowledge, power builds her world in a new way. But she contributes something to this union also, to that calm pace of mind, of knowledge. She gives speed to thinking and need to live what the soul saw. It's a very important contribution to living an impetus, a push, a drive to know, to gain knowledge, and to see things correctly. Kamala.
His Canto cast her bosoms to him. No. She crowned the ideal, a king and quirking words. Put her magic, serpent, sculpture and God's truth. Made form his inward vision without shifts, and her acts the living body of his glory.
So it's an embrace, no? His splendor, the splendor of that luminous knowledge. He embraces her, and she embraces him back. Her puissance, her power to him clung. And she gives him power. She crowns the idea a king in purple robes. And a king should have a scepter, a staff that's a sign of his power. No? So she has power. She has her magic serpent scepter, that staff of energy. She hands it over to him. She gives it to his thought, power of thought. And she gives forms, visible forms, to his inward visions, rhythmic shapes. She gives a power of realization to his visions. And she acts out his will. She makes her actions the living body of his will. So when knowledge and power meet, that's something very powerful. That continues this description, Bhuvana.
A flaming thunder, a created flash, his bitter light flowed on the deathless force. A centaur's mighty gallop bore the god. Life thrown with mine, a double majesty.
Yes. So what is the picture? A flaming thunder, a creator flash. His victor light, his victorious light is riding on her force, the life force, which is imaged as a horse, no? But a deathless horse. And when these two powers meet, the power of knowledge, of thought, and of powerful vitality, creative force, the centaur is the image of that. A centaur is a figure in Greek mythology with the body of a horse and the upper part the body of a man, the face, and so it's a combination of the noble human being and the horse, all its vitality, the wisdom and the power. A centaur's mighty gallop bore the god. Life throned with mind, a double majesty. The two powers, equal rulers.
Le centaure, Shraddhavan, is the Sagittarian chart.
Yes, the center, yes. Yes.
So here the mind appears. Here the mind appears.
The mind appears, that's representing the knowledge, the thought. Yeah, the Sagittarius, of course, is an archer with a bow. Yeah. That's also a very important symbol. He aims his bow and can send his thought or his will directly to the target. No?
But he turned back.
He's looking back.
Just the point. Like that.
Well, there may be different ways of depicting it. Yeah.
But, I don't know that.
Anyway, I think that's a good place to stop. Well, there are more worlds that Sri Aurobindo's going to tell us about, but this equal meeting of life with mind is one of them. The Spirit's luminousness was bodied there. Life's contraries were lovers or natural friends, and her extremes keen edges of harmony. Indulgence with a tender purity came and nursed the god on her maternal breast. There none was weak, so falsehood could not live. Ignorance was a thin shade protecting light. Imagination, the free will of truth. Pleasure, a candidate for heaven's fire. The intellect was beauty's worshipper. Strength was the slave of calm spiritual law. Power laid its head upon the breasts of bliss. There were summit glories inconceivable, autonomies of wisdom's still self-rule, and high dependencies of her virgin Son, illumined theocracies of the seeing soul, throned in the power of the Transcendent's ray. A vision of grandeurs, a dream of magnitudes, in sun-bright kingdoms moved with regal gait. Assemblies, crowded senates of the gods, life's puissances reigned on seats of marble will. High dominations and autocracies and laurelled strengths and armed imperative mights. All objects there were great and beautiful. All beings wore a royal stamp of power. There sat the oligarchies of natural law. Proud, violent heads served one calm monarch brow. All the soul's postures donned divinity. There met the ardent mutual intimacies of mastery's joy and the joy of servitude, imposed by love on love's heart that obeys, and love's body held beneath a rapturous yoke. All was a game of meeting kinglinesses, for worship lifts the worshipper's bowed strength, close to the God's pride and bliss his soul adores. The ruler there is one with all he rules. To him who serves with a free, equal heart, obedience is his princely training school, his nobility's coronet and privilege. His faith is a high nature's idiom, his service a spiritual sovereignty. There were realms where knowledge joined creative power in her high home and made her all his own. The grand illuminate seized her gleaming limbs and filled them with the passion of his ray, till all her body was its transparent house, and all her soul a counterpart of his soul. Apotheosized, transfigured by wisdom's touch, her days became a luminous sacrifice. An immortal moth in happy and endless fire, she burned in his sweet, intolerable blaze. A captive life wedded her conqueror. In his wide sky she built her world anew. She gave to mind's calm pace the motor's speed, to thinking a need to live what the soul saw, to living an impetus to know and see. His splendor grasped her puissance to him clung. She crowned the idea a king in purple robes, put her magic serpent scepter in thought's grip, made forms his inward vision's rhythmic shapes, and her acts the living body of his will. A flaming thunder, a creator flash, his victor light rode on her deathless force. A centaur's mighty gallop bore the god. Life throned with mind, a double majesty.